Satellite coming down in 3, 2, 1.
Go, go, go!
Hourglass, a map unanimously despised by Battlefield 2042 players, has finally had its rework released almost 2 years into the game's life. How does the final base map rework of 2042 stack up? Before I begin, I just want to make clear that today we are mostly going to talk about the reworked map layout, not its original form. That version is now ancient history, and we can revisit that topic another time. The new version of Hourglass is a 7-flag conquest map, and for better or worse, has the exact same flag layout in both the 64-player and 128-player versions. The only difference between the two is a larger vehicle count. The increased amounts are probably appropriate for the larger scale, however the tendency for infantry to be overwhelmed and vehicles to be spawn camped is greatly increased. The main conquest design of Hourglass, previously one of the largest maps in Battlefield history and known for its vast spaces between flags, has been scaled down significantly. The most notable casualty of this downsizing was the complete removal of the stadium as a playable asset. The stadium was of course one of the most active areas of the original map, with the most cover and the tightest flag density, so many players are sad to see it go. Though the calls to provide the community with a smaller, perhaps TDM infantry-only design in and around the stadium as a separate map has not fallen on deaf ears at DICE, so we will see. Anyway, the new Conquest layout is now in the form of a rectangular shape reminiscent to Kaleidoscope. There are 2 deployment locations in each main base, on the very east and the very west, with only the west being able to deploy vehicles. This immediately does 2 things. First, it sets up the easternmost part of the map, which lies in the ruins of the 3 city flags, as the de facto infantry zone. Second, it sets up the western side of the map, or rather, the western 2/3, as a head-on vehicle clash. More on that shortly. E1, F1, and G1 are the flags which make up the eastern battleground, and while their spacing isn't terrible, the area is not without issue. The F1 flag is by far the most revamped, with plenty of new cover and better terrain design on the way up to the main road toward the D flag, with the giant sand dune largely removed. The E1 flag sits practically on top of the Russian deployment, and when held by the US, the deployment spawn points can be camped in clear view from behind cover. Moreover, should the US team have players on the nearby E rooftops, countering this verticality can be challenging as neither building has elevator access. On the opposite end, the G1 flag sits in the dilapidated building lobby from the original map design, with barely any noticeable or impactful changes to the surrounding area. Interestingly, the few new assets which were added around the point face the US deployment and not the main battleground. It just seems empty, and on top of that it sits closer to the US deployment zone here than to the F1 flag. So taking it and leaving it feels like a waste of time when it gets captured back shortly thereafter. Should you wish to join the battle for the rest of the map, the D1 flag is the closest, though not by an insignificant margin. It comprises the area around the fortified outpost set up above the tattered bridge. And this is where the map begins this weird stretch of linearity. Players must follow the highway, using it as cover as they move toward the C1 flag. And I say that they must because there simply isn't anything else here. Not another flag, no extra buildings, containers, rubble. Anything. And this is a major problem. Sure, it funnels the infantry players into a small grind along the highway where head glitches are amazing, but the non-existent cover on both sides makes everyone here target practice for any and all vehicles which come along, and it can be a lot of them. As players continue down this one-road map experience, they arrive at the C1 flag, consisting of a significantly overhauled part of the map, defined by a giant crater in the sand and destroyed chunk of the overpass. Once again, an area with extremely little cover. This is made even worse by spawn locations placed nearby in the middle of nowhere, where players can be cut down in seconds. Both sections of the destroyed overpass don't help matters, as each side provides a high ground location for players to watch newly spawned enemies approach. A newly added tunnel on the western side of the crater is exposed and leads through a small passage to the B1 flag in the tunnel beneath the arches. While the tunnel is a good addition to the map, its exit in the crater can nonetheless be camped hard, especially in Breakthrough. Outside of the city itself, the B1 flag is the most recognizable zone of the original map remaining, and it has undergone a substantial upgrade. Massive amounts of cover both above the flag, within the tunnel, and in the zone between B1 and C1 make it by far the most protected and most intense area of the new map design. However, it should be noted that this zone can be extremely frustrating, made so thanks to some of the worst spawn point placement on the map, including one where you literally spawn in a fire pit. And there is also the fact that you are in the zone of the highest vehicle density. This, of course, brings us to both the topics of the A flag and the vehicle situation on the map. As I mentioned earlier, the main base deployments on this side of the map are the only locations for vehicles to spawn. These deployments are separated by only a moderate distance with two very close flags in between, A1 and B1. The A1 flag is almost a joke of an objective. It is a narrow stretch of partially sand-covered buildings as seen in the previous design. Aside from the destructible houses and walls, barely any other cover exists. Why it's only a single street wide is anyone's guess, but it makes for a terrible experience in both Conquest and particularly in Breakthrough, where it comprises the first sector. Compounding this terrible flag environment is the fact that the town just sort of dissipates into the sand dunes the moment the border goes into the US deployment zone. This means that both infantry and especially vehicles have almost no cover or protection on spawn. Of course, this means that dumbfire rockets, javelins, laser-guided missiles, helicopters, and normal tank shells can fire upon newly spawned US vehicles immediately. But the real kicker here is once again the Tor railgun tank, which, shocker, is making an absolute mess of map balance and game design. High ground dunes on both the left and right of the A and B flags give clear line of sight into the US main, and to a lesser extent the Russian main, meaning that both teams can have vehicles, including helicopters and jets, killed almost instantaneously on spawn. This is incredibly bad map design in this location. While removing the railgun tank as a vehicle option on the map would be a significant improvement, it won't solve the deployment cover issue desperately needed on both sides. The overpass, which rounds the B1 flag, is largely the reason the Russian team has a fundamental advantage on the Conquest layouts. It provides a visual obstruction protecting newly spawned Russian vehicles, but the verticality advantage it gives Russian infantry further allows a beatdown of US armor from afar. And with A1's propensity to be completely destroyed throughout a round, barely any cover remains for US infantry and vehicles. Hourglass's new vehicle counts, truthfully, are not that bad considering the map's size. 2 armored transports, 1 light armor, 2 heavy armor, 2 attack helicopters, and 1 fighter jet. Not having an air transport is a great change of pace on the map, something which should be considered on others. Aside from the occasional annoyance of having multiple stealth helicopters active at a time, the largest vehicle issue on the map remains the railgun tank, which should be removed outright given the map size and cross-map line of sight. I actually do like the dynamic of having a separate deployment on one far side of the map for a vehicle showdown, but the close proximity and lack of cover around the deployments makes it extremely frustrating and very confusing. Then there is the open space. I guess Hourglass wouldn't be Hourglass without a substantial amount of desert. While this vast territory north and south of D and C is largely used by flanking vehicles, it is beyond excessive, and only amplifies the range at which rockets and rail tanks can engage or allow for the greater slaughter of infantry. Like the original design of Hourglass before it, the verticality of the skyscraper rooftops allow for cross-map tactics like wingsuit use, long-range rockets, and sniper campers. While often annoying, these don't negatively affect the map too badly. The new Conquest version of Hourglass may be a significant step up from the launch version, but more work is still required. I recommend the following actions. Number 1. Remove the rail tank from the vehicle pool. Number 2. Do a pass on spawn point locations from objectives A through D to provide more cover and relative safety on spawn. Number 3. Increase the density of cover in the current A1 flag, and expand it by another street length to the east, at least doubling the current size of the A1 village. Number 4. Add some sort of cover in the form of a few small indestructible buildings between the US and Russian deployments and the main map. And number 5. Add additional small-scale buildings of no more than 3 floors, or military fortifications, along the northern and southern edges of the main highway from C to just past D1. This would allow far greater cover for infantry moving from flag to flag, expand the flanking opportunities, reduce cross-map vehicle engagements, and in Breakthrough, prevent tanks from completely wiping a team off the highway during the fight for the 3rd sector. These changes are what I would consider the highest priority on the existing layout. To briefly touch upon the new Breakthrough design, I consider it a large improvement. After all, the main layout of the map seems to be tailored for a Breakthrough route. Even the D flag has defensive fortifications in only one direction. The lone exception of needed changes would be that of the 1st sector in what is the Conquest A1 flag location. This sector is currently a terrible experience, and it gives me vibes of the pain that the original format of Battlefield 1's Suez map could give players. It is a meat grinder of epic proportions within way too small of an area, which gets completely destroyed in 2 minutes. Vehicles on the attacking side get obliterated because of the same deployment cover issues I mentioned earlier. At present, the only recommendations I have for the Breakthrough design is what I would apply to this area already in its Conquest form. Expand the village area, add more cover, and add some sort of large obstruction for newly spawned players and vehicles. There are also a few important realizations I quickly want to mention. First, the tornadoes seem to be a rare occurrence on this version. Maybe it's just me, but I also think that this is a really good call. When it does come through, I have to say that it fits this environment better than any other in the game, especially when it hits the city directly. It definitely gives off the proper vibes of the game from the original marketing. Next, despite the focus of the rework being on the map terrain and layout, there is still something about flying jets between the buildings of this city in particular, as opposed to Kaleidoscope, that feels fantastic. Lastly, when the sandstorm does occasionally hit, it feels less annoying than any previous sandstorm iteration found in the entire series, and it's actually quite entrancing. I also supremely appreciate the fact that it does not linger for long. It hits, and then it's gone in a few minutes. Moreover, the sandstorm and the darkness it brings remind us of an oft-forgotten fact. Hourglass can be beautiful. The lighting patterns which roll along most of the skyscrapers provides a stunningly unique element to a map frequently regarded as bland, and harkens back to the map's original concept art. Too bad it lasts for such a short time. Perhaps one way to spice things up would be to make one of the 2 game modes a completely night version of the map, illuminated by the canvas of skyscraper lighting effects and player tracer fire. As it stands, I would currently give the Breakthrough variant a 5 out of 10 and the Conquest version a 4 out of 10. Neither of which I would categorize as being the worst in this game, nor have a place in my worst map series. However, with regard to 128 players, I think that the map is insanely too small and every issue is exacerbated fivefold. It adds yet another reason to avoid that playlist altogether. Players, however, should not conflate new experiences with those criticisms lingering from the old design. The new layout should stand on its own without the original's baggage. What I scored this map now is based on its current form, yet many things drag it down. Terrible spawn locations, cover issues, objective designs, ability for vehicles to dominate from across the map within their own uncaps, the major map imbalance with the Russian team winning far more frequently on Conquest, the rail tank nonsense, and the lack of any wow factor. Moderate changes would boost my own opinion of it, and I believe overall player satisfaction. But it's not a matter of whether this map can be improved, it should still be improved. It remains fairly bland, and even with layout changes, there needs to be an additional draw for gamers to say, wow, that is pretty cool. I think the skyscraper lighting can be that unique element. In conclusion, despite a solid rework which results in a much faster paced map experience, a lot of layout issues need addressing. There is a lot of lingering potential from Hourglass, but whether we actually get to experience it remains to be seen. After all, the clock is ticking.